Thank you for joining us for part one, The Art of the Possible with AI, of our three-part Demystifying AI webinar series. In this session, we will explore how AI has evolved, why it's more relevant than ever, and how it's shaping modern enterprise data strategies. Discover emerging trends, ethical considerations, and what to expect in the next 1 to 5 years as AI continues to transform the way we work and innovate. We're excited to welcome Antonio Manrico, Technology and AI Lead at SEI, one of eImagine's strategy partners. With over 20 years of experience in software engineering and data architecture, Antonio has designed AI strategies and predictive systems for both startups and global enterprises, always with an emphasis on security, scalability, and sustainability. Now I'll turn it over to you, Antonio.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about AI. We're going to cover some foundations. Let me just share my screen real quick. Boom. Perfect. I'll try to flip as much as I can back into Teams. I'm not a huge fan of lecture styles, so if you have any questions, please just come off mic, raise your hand, and then Tim or April, if you can facilitate and say, hey, somebody has their hand raised, so we can go into that. I think every time I do one of these, the more interactive it becomes, the more value we create. So I encourage everyone to come in, scream, interrupt, whatever is easier. All right, so a little bit about myself, speaker. Just to give you a little bit of my background. So my background is heavy on the software side. Been an engineer since the 90s. Really focused on infrastructure, really focused on systems, anything really that has to do with software lifecycle management, data, federated identity systems, cybersecurity. And over the last few years, I've had this kind of, or been evangelizing the notion of how do we start kind of automating and removing a lot of the waste that humans have from a daily perspective. And what I mean by that is, like, we do so much repetitive work, we do so many repetitive tasks that really leads us to not have very fulfilling kind of work careers. So I'm trying to really eradicate that. And by eradicating a lot of the kind of repetitive tasks or a lot of the repetitive stuff that we're doing, we're enabling humans to do what we're very good at, which is abstract thinking, creative thinking, and being able to build these, really deep kind of interpersonal relationships. So, so a little bit about me and kind of what my impetus behind a lot of this is. All right, so the art of the possible. But before, let's talk a little bit about this. A lot of times people are saying, oh, AI is the new fad. AI is, it's like this is the new kind of shiny toy, right? I think everyone's heard that. But the reality is that is actually not the case. Even if you go back to the 1960s, when you have Alan Turing that coined the term, hey, what is a smart machine? The notion of AI kind of was born, right? And then you had IBM kind of with Big Blue back in the 80s trying to figure out, hey, how do we now build a machine that is smart enough to then, play chess against grandmasters? And then what ended up happening is that, okay, well, after a few attempts, it finally won, and the whole world said, okay, great, now what the hell does this mean? And you fast forward to where we are, and that's kind of how we got into the sector. But in the mainstream, we have seen a lot of these things, right? Pandora was part of the Music Gnome project, and Pandora used machine learning to be able to actually determine what particular patterns in terms of songs and footprints that you, a listener, would like to have, right? So that was an early introduction of machine learning. You have things like Shazam, right? Very similar technology, but it says, hey, if you have this song that's kind of playing and I just put my phone out and I record it, I can tell you what song it is, right? So that also uses machine learning within the AI space. And then 2003, this is one of the twin robots that explored the surface of Mars without a single human intervention. So essentially had this autonomous pilot that would be able to kind of go through all the terrain and, be able to kind of, have that footprint. And of course, with all these amazing technological advances, Bluetooth is still a pain in the ass and you still can't figure it out. So kind of gives you a little bit of context of where we are as a humankind. So a lot of the value stream mapping, really, when you look at this, a lot of companies fail because they don't have a North Star of what it is that they're trying to solve. So when we look at AI, It's not anything different than what we've seen historically. There's only three buckets. You're either trying to increase your revenue, which means new market opportunities. I want to personalize. I want to really give my customers better experience, so then they want to buy more of my product. You're reducing spend, right? So this comes a lot from operations. How do I automate? How do I optimize processes? So I eliminate a lot of our waste, which means that I'm spending less dollars on my maintenance. And the third bucket is mitigating risk, right? This is almost like an investment that you have to do to keep you out of jail, sort of thing. So every time that we think about AI, every time that we think about products, we want to think about from a frame or a prism of what is the thing that we're really trying to solve here within these particular in these buckets. Now, you never want to optimize for more than one, but yes, there are scenarios where when you optimize for one, you get a collateral benefit of another bucket, right? But you always want to make sure that you keep one top of mind. So I get this question a lot: who's doing AI right? And the reality is that even some of the biggest companies in the world, like Google, are still, kind of figuring out. This is earlier days. Obviously, a lot of the models have been upgraded, especially in the span of a year. But this is what it's known as hallucinations, right? So, for example, all the way on the right, you have a dog that had that is it's a picture from a Reddit forum that you had a dog and you had all these kind of like Dalmatian-looking puppies around it. And what does a vision recognition system say? Yes, absolutely, a dog has given birth to baby cows because it has the same pattern as a cow, and here's a dog. So yes, I believe that dogs gave birth to a cow. You have the same thing in the middle where you can eat at least one small rock a day. So this just goes to show you that even at that scale and even at the public eye, companies are still experimenting with it, right? So if they're experimenting with it, why should you not experiment with it? So a couple of things before we start getting into AI is human behavior. We really need to understand human behavior to really understand how these value stream mappings kind of come to be and why do we make the decisions that we make. This has been highly, highly researched over the last 30, 40 years. And you have this notion of security versus convenience. This is really when you really think about it from a value proposition, I love this quote, which is a wall against tools builds tunnels, and a wall against tunnels builds exits. And what this really, how I interpret this is when you build all this kind of governance and all these things around that you cannot use this, you cannot use this tool to do your job, what happens is that people go and they use their own personal stuff to be able to do the work that they need to do, right? They have a job to do and they need to fulfill it to the best of their ability. So what happens a lot is that you go to ChatGPT and you go on your personal site and then you're leaking public and you're leaking, IP, you're leaking any type of sensitive information from your company. So what happens is when you try to stop that, then you're starting to lose talent because then I don't want to work for a company that is impeding me from doing my job. They're not giving me my tools. I find tools to be able to do it. I'm being impeded from being able to do this, so I'm going to exit, right? So something to really keep in mind. And the best way to illustrate this is this spectrum, right? You can't have full secure system with full convenience. And research has shown that humans always err on the side of convenience. We as humans, we will give up security, we will give up particular rights as long as it's more convenient to us. And there's a lot of research behind this, right? So when you look at this, look at it from that prism of humans err on the side of convenience rather than security. It doesn't mean that security is not important. It's just as a company or as an individual, you need to know what your risk tolerance is to be able to know where you fall in the spectrum. Just checking when I go silent is because I'm just flipping back and make sure there's no questions or anything like that. All right. So let's understand a little bit of where we are with AI. And when we look at technology, you can always identify the patterns, right? What we're seeing with AI, it is not anything new. When we look at ARPANET, which is really the basis of where the internet or the creation of what the internet is, this gave birth to companies like eBay and PayPal, right? 1995, 1998, before the whole dot-com boom. That's what the internet gave birth to, right? And we go into this whole world of managed infrastructure. This is where the term cloud usually comes for, right? It's like, hey, how do I now, instead of managing my own physical things, I can just pay somebody to manage them for me, and I just focus on my business value proposition. So the early 2000s, you have companies like Linode, AWS, GCP, you have companies for Square, for example, for payments. And what is important to understand here is when you look at cloud, at very early 2000s, there was not a single enterprise on this planet that said, you know what, I want to move my data to some foreign entity that I don't trust and put all my information there. The posture was, No, there's no freaking way I'm putting sensitive data on the cloud. I don't know who these providers are. Yeah, I don't know who Amazon. I don't know. Like, I'm just not doing that. Fast forward to where we are today, there's not a single company that does not have a cloud strategy, right? So when we fast forward, we look at payments. Same thing. Oh, I don't believe in cloud. It's just not going to be. It's not something that I trust. No, absolutely. I'm not putting my payment on an internet website. Like, I don't know who the hell is going to be able to see that. I have no idea, right? So, but you have companies that focus on that, and guess what? Now everything is digital. It's digital, right? You have micropayments. You have a huge digital footprint for payments, so it became a normal. So as we continue looking at this, we look at companies again: Slack, Uber, Miro. Uber's a really important one because we need to also understand what Uber did at this from a sector level. So once we get to the 2010s, we start really focusing on SaaS applications. We look at particular like crypto, for example. So we have a little company, OpenAI, that started in 2015. So now we start moving into automation and intelligence, which is where we are today in terms of like AI. Okay, now we have things like Anthropic. We have companies like Harvey. Harvey is a company evaluated, I think the last valuation was a bit over $1 billion. And they are a legal kind of AI company that essentially does all your research. It is essentially a whole team of very, very smart paralegals that have all the history of all public filings of all cases, right? So you can see a lot of value in there, right? You can actually do a lot of research, I mean, instantaneously without having to pay a room of paralegals and humans that, fatigue, we get tired, we don't process things specifically. So, we're kind of moving into that realm. So why is Uber important here? Is a lot of the times we think, oh, okay, well, this company is, started this particular kind of business proposition, but what Uber really gave birth to was what we know today as the gig economy. That gig economy is now valued over $500 billion estimated. So what we want to understand from a pattern perspective is that as these new technologies kind of come in, nobody would have thought that the internet would have been given birth to Uber almost 20 something years after, right? But it did happen. So when we look at AI, it's no different. What is AI kind of providing? What are the opportunities that we see from a peripheral that we're going to be able to actually look at from an opportunity perspective? So nobody really knows this stuff. But we can say, hey, there is a movement now in the market for skill set consolidation. Right? How do we now make sure that all people have the same exact tools to produce the same type of quality? And that's the era that I think we're going to start moving into, and we're going to see this even more accelerated over the next 10 years. 2030s is very kind of conservative estimate. I think this can actually happen at a faster pace. And then, of course, we talk about singularity. Like sometimes I always joke about this, but sometimes I wake up and I think that AI, our supreme AI overlords, are going to come and save humanity from humanity. And then other times I wake up and I watch Terminator with Arnold, and I'm like, yeah, that almost looks like a documentary, right? So I bounce between those two ideals quite a bit, and it's just the nature where we are as humanity, and what some of the intelligence that these AI agents are able to do. So why AI now? This is pretty kind of self-explanatory from a business perspective. We know there's a business imperative. There's the tech landscape. Companies are always either at the forefront, they're either trailing or they're really at the end. But there's a business imperative across the board to say, hey, this is not a tool. This is not a fad. This is something that is going to be embedded across our entire kind of work stream, life, personal. Like, you can't just kind of put it into a little container. Common challenges that we see in the enterprise is lack of unified strategy. You don't know what bucket or value stream you want to serve. Siloed data around that, but siloed data is a big issue that we see as well. Difficulty scaling, like what does this look like at scale? And recruiting competency. How do we actually hire people that know what they're doing and not somebody that says that they know what they're doing, but then you hire them and they have no idea what it is, right? And then obviously some of the benefits of a practice that we see is the governance, the share best practices. You reduce a lot of the duplication, right? Even though duplication, sometimes I would wager to say that it is important, because what happens with duplication is that you have two different ideals being executed very differently. So it actually gives room for innovation and different thought processing. So what is AI? This is probably one of my favorite diagrams, and it took me, if I told you how long it took me, I'm a little bit embarrassed. It took me forever. I'm not a good designer, but I'm really particularly proud of this one. So as you go from top theory and research all the way to mainstream values, start looking at the layers as we have them laid out here. So we have artificial intelligence, which is really just an area of study. Machine learning is really a subfield of artificial intelligence where you can do things like fraud detection, predictive maintenance, customer segmentation, things like that. Neural networks is a subset of machine learning, right? So it uses the concept of how do we actually mimic the human brain to be able to actually teach or be able to think, be able to have a machine identify things that we can't, right? So this is where image recognition, natural language processing, time series analysis, like this is where neural networks start coming into. Deep learning essentially now uses many of those neural networks to be able to then determine not only categorization or identification of things, but how do I actually now compose a system of different decision points, right? So things like medical diagnosis, autonomous vehicles, speech recognition, right? Something that requires a lot of different neural networks. And then underneath this entire thing, we have this generative AI sector that, just in 2 years, has just almost created $1 trillion industry, right? And one of the big things that I always look at here is that look at where the LLMs are in terms of the stack from a where kind of generative AI sits and LLMs sit, and imagine the world that we still have yet to discover across the entire stack, right? So it's a minimal thing of what we're going to see, moving forward. All right. So what is AI and what is not? AI augments human capabilities. It's not a magic solution for every problem. It's not perfect, but then again, neither are humans. I always have these conversations where they say, yeah, but AI is giving me this. I asked it a question and it gave me the wrong answer. And my question right after that is like, hey, do humans always give you the right answer? And then there's a little bit of a click there of like, oh, wait, why am I holding this thing to a higher standard that I also don't hold humans to a higher standard, right? So there's a lot of paradigm shifts that we need to start understanding from a behavioral human perspective, where we can't compare AI to these perfect things when we can't even compare ourselves, right? So we need to be able to have an equal benchmark that then we can figure out, well, where is AI good? Where is it better than human kind of reasoning versus where it's worse? And then be able to really look at it from that lens rather than this perfect kind of silver lining. One of the benefits that the AI does have is that it has better and faster retrieval information. It obviously has limitations of technical, ethical, legal, but that's what machines are designed to do. Machines can store infinitely more information that humans can. Back to my original point of humans are really good at abstract thinking, creative, adapting, things that machines are not good at doing yet. So that is where you start having this kind of extension of human cognition into AI models. This is where we find AI, right? Voice assistants, chatbots, anything that has to do any type of inference, which means, hey, let me understand what you're trying to say, and then I'm going to give you back some type of answer. Recommendation engines or personalization for like marketing campaigns. There's a lot of AI in there. Software for autonomous vehicles, tremendous amount of AI in there. What it is not is traditional software programs. Not everything is AI. Processed with some type of deterministic output. Also not AI. AI is probabilistic. It will never actually give you some type of 100% validity. And automation, right? Automation doesn't necessarily have to be AI. This is probably one of the biggest ones I see in the enterprise is, oh yeah, I need AI because I want to automate the spreadsheet going from here to over there. It's like, well, not really AI. That's more automation. But there is smart automation where you use that basic layer of automation with some types of insights or intelligence on top of that. Okay, so some analogies here and to really understand, let's just look at Lego sets, right? Let's just say that machine learning are Lego sets. When you build a neural network, essentially you're saying you're having the exact same piece stacked on top of each other. They may be different qualifiers, maybe different things that they're looking at. So one of them looks like a cat, for example. Like I have here on the right-hand side, one floor, one simple decision. Is it this? Is it that? Based on some type of training data. And then when you start stacking them, then you have deep learning, which then allows you to say, well, yes, because I can actually determine all these different things, I could also determine context around it, which means that, okay, well, if I see a cat and I also see a dog, I see a bench, I see some trees, well, maybe this is a picnic scene, right? So that's how neural networks and deep learning are kind of very intertwined. So analogies, as I said, I love analogies. I love simple reasoning. I like kind of taking very abstract concepts and making them easier to understand. So here, when you have machine learning, it's like a child learning to recognize objects, right? Imagine for those of you that have kids, it's like, okay, well, when you have a baby and you're starting to grow, this is a spoon, this is a fork, that's a balloon, that's a ball, right? So very simple, kind of term to understand. And also notice that a lot of the things that I do from an AI perspective, I always try to equate them to human behavior because again, we're talking about the concept of learning. It's just that there's a synthetic machine doing it versus an organic being, but the similarities are there. Neural networks are modeled after the human brain structure and function, as I mentioned. Deep learning uses many neural networks. So, for example, let's just solve the JFK assassination mystery, right? Like, hey, well, was it the government? Was it Oswald? Like, what was this? Well, I need a lot of different information to then be able to narrow down what I think, probabilistically actually did happen. So that's where deep learning comes in. Then you have generative AI, which is like asking your kid to draw an animal or write a poem, and it gets better over time, right? Let's just say that you have your kid draw a cat every single day for any time that they start kindergarten to all the way that they're in high school. That cat or animal is going to be really, really good. AI is the exact same thing, right? The more I do it, the more information I have, the better I'm going to get. It's just that generative AI actually grows a lot faster and it processes a lot more than a child or a human can do. And then you have the LLMs, which is basically this gateway to generating content like text or sounds or music. I mean, images, video, whatever it is that you're generating content from, basically nothing, right? It didn't exist, and now it creates this new thing. So it's like almost like a phone for the internet, where you can actually start integrating with a lot of the ecosystem in AI tools. So, role of data and AI, I don't spend a lot of time here. Obviously, it's important. You need a ton of data. There's a big importance in data quality and quantity and diversity, where you have bias, but you could also make the case that, hey, there is also bias introduced in classrooms, for example, right? What history books are you reading? What kind of romance languages? What kind of novels are you reading, right? There's always bias. Bias is always going to be introduced in the world, no matter how you're looking at it, right? So why is the machine also not susceptible to that when we humans are very susceptible to that? Obviously, proper data management, governance, security best practices. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can look at this. There's also concepts where you can actually take AI to clean up your data, right? A lot of the misconceptions that we hear is like, oh, my AI is not ready. My data is not ready. My data is not clean. I have siloed data. Well, there's AI that can actually help you also leverage that and still experiment with the space, right? So it's not an excuse not to get involved. There's all sorts of different patterns that you could use to be able to do that. And some of the key activities and some of the value enablers when you start looking at data and AI. All right. Some trends and insights. So this is probably one of my favorite slides here. Obviously, huge market expansion. I think that's probably going to be just eclipsed. You also have Gen AI adoption. You have a ton of companies that are regularly using Gen AI tools. Energy consumption, obviously, the processing power is just absolutely enormous. So this also forces innovation at the renewable energy sector of like, well, we can't continue on this path if everything's going to be in AI and everything's going to be processing. Well, what the hell do we do? Because we're not going to be able to actually consume with traditional kind of energy generating methodologies. So there is going to be big breakthroughs, I think, in that sector. And this is one of those things where the same thing as Uber that created a gig economy, where AI may actually be benefiting that the whole world, is not really looking at, is, well, because of this computational and efficiency of what we have today, it's going to force us to look at other renewable sources, right? So that also takes a while to do, but it is going to it's already forcing the industries to start looking at stuff like that. Obviously, the corporate investment is absolutely massive. And one of my favorite slides here is this job creation, right? So when we start looking at, also very similar to Uber, gig economy, right? Uber is going to absolutely eradicate the cab industry. And yes, it crippled it, but guess what? It created the notion of, what is this gig economy? I can just sign up for something, do some type of work, and actually get paid as an individual. Okay, awesome, right? So it gave all these different people that couldn't work before some type of responsibility in our communities. So it's very similar also to when we talk about the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution came in and they said, okay, well, we're going to start replacing line workers with machinery. So line workers, of course, they went on strikes, everything that happened during the Industrial Revolution, because they said, well, it's going to take over my job. Like, no, I don't want this. But what actually happened, once you start like kind of measuring this over time, is that those machines needed to be designed, those machines needed to be installed, they needed to be maintained. Then they got smarter, where you have an actual software, then you have the replacement of it. You have all of these sectors that were born because of the Industrial Revolution that we take for granted, right? You also talk about like structural engineering. You talk about all the industrial engineering with processing and machinery and the kind of dichotomy between human activities and machine generated activities. So the reason why I always draw that correlation is that from a jobs perspective, is that yes, it is going to annihilate a lot of jobs, but I think it's going to create a lot more jobs, and it's going to create jobs that we can't even understand that are going to actually become a thing, because we still need to evolve from this stage and it needs to be adopted. And then, it's just a natural kind of evolution of human adaptation with the tools and the technology that's being introduced. So always keep this in mind. I was just talking to a client about like the future of the workforce and what we see from companies that are basically annihilating and saying, yeah, I don't need a marketing department. I have with AI, goodbye, and get fired. I think companies that are trying to maintain that talent and then figure out or buy time to then upskill them or figure that out, when you start looking at 5, 10 years, when all of these new opportunities come up, the companies that actually really focused on maintaining human kind of interactions and that human upskill and not getting rid of them for I think those companies will thrive because the cultural perspective is going to speak volumes versus the companies that just said, hey, get rid of humans, get rid of humans. And then when they turn around and say, actually, we need more humans because these new opportunities opened up, they're going to say, wait, no, but that's not a company I want to work for, right? So also keep that in mind from an evolutionary perspective. All right. So the new age. So what does this look like? What's going to happen in 1 to 5 years? And these are very, again, these could be accelerated, they could be completely off, but this is really based on the prism of where we are today and what we're seeing from not only the enterprise side, but also from a human kind of adoption. Transcriptions, right? Transcriptions are always a little bit of a, not a little bit, they're a lot of a headache for, especially for legal teams, but one of the theses that I would, or one of the hypotheses that I have here is that I think transcriptions from a professional work perspective, it's almost going to be mandated. I think every company is going to have the turning them on automatically for main meetings. And the reason for that is going back to security versus convenience. Most people have a very adverse reaction to this and they say, absolutely not. I don't want my voice recorded. I don't want this company to know what the hell I'm talking about. But when you flip the switch and you go into the convenience, what you're going to say is like, wait, this thing is listening to me. It's giving me actual like agenda topics. It's giving me all these things. It's actually parsing this information um, and making it easier for me to reason and be able to actually use this. Wow, there's a lot of convenience in there. So you know what? I'm going to restrict my personal kind of comments and my personal commentary, anything that I do from a personal relationship in these meetings. And I'm going to separate that somewhere else because I have so much more convenience when these things are listening, transcribing, and actually taking notes. One of the aha moments that I had with he's a director for this big utilities company out East Coast. And one of the things was like, listen, they turned Copilot on. I don't find any value. I think AI is the devil. I think it's a fad, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I try to get a little bit under the hood of like, okay, well, what are some of the things that you're running into, right? Hey, you're a director. Like, how many meetings do you have a week? And he said, oh, I would say probably about 70. And I said, well, how many do you attend? He says, maybe a handful. I can't attend all of them. And I said, well, why don't you open up Copilot and actually ask it to give you all the summaries about all the meetings that you were supposed to into and catch you up because transcription was enabled. And 60 seconds as this information was coming back, and then the next few minutes as he was kind of reading into this was probably one of the biggest transformations I've seen from a person that said, absolutely not, this is terrible, to like, I had no idea that I can actually now catch up and actually look at the takeaways, look at everything I had to do because I don't have time for all these meetings. But now that I'm caught up, I can make decisions as a strategic leader, right? So that's where transcriptions, I think, come in from an important perspective and how I see transcriptions will evolve over the next few years. And then, of course, we have to think about, well, as soon as you enable transcriptions, and I talked a little bit about this, a few minutes ago, if I enable transcription, well, what does that do with interpersonal relationships, right? What happens to the water cooler chat? And I think what's going to happen is going to force people to have more meaningful personal relationships rather than this work, sort of blurred work, personal kind of chit chat, right? So I think humans are going to start compartmentalizing a little bit of that, right? So it's just, as a theory. Deep fakes and digital twins, I think this is probably one of the most interesting areas. And I would say that this could be why the world ends is digital fakes, right? When you look at presidential election back in 2016 with a Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, where you have all these kind of news that are being curated and some of them are fake, some of them are not. What's going to happen is that because our education and we don't have the right systems in place, even from a legislative perspective or posture, what happens is that people don't want to interpret. People want to be fed what they want to see. And the way that social media algorithms work is that whatever you're seeing, I'm going to give you more of it because I get more attention of you in my application, which means that I have more eyeballs, which means that I can advertise more. So what's going to happen is that you're going to have this world with deepfakes and people without the ability to actually be able to actually like research, draw their own conclusions. So they're just going to be fed this information from influencers, from corporations, and that could be very, very, very bad. There's obviously a lot of work being done at the legislative layer to be able to actually tag AI videos and tag particular information that comes from AI, just to be able to actually create some type of safeguard. But at some point, I mean, there's some videos and pictures, and I'm sure everyone in this call has seen them, that you look and you say, I can't tell if that's real or if it's fake. Like, there's absolutely no way to actually tell. So as we look at this, well, how's information going to be consumed? And the biggest issue is like, how do we actually validate the authenticity, or how do we verify that this information, where it came from, or whether it's real or not? And then you have to look at, well, what is actually defined real, right? News always have perspectives, they always have agendas. So it's a really interesting space that we should be thinking about as we think about, kind of the future of the workforce and evolution. And the other one that I mentioned, which is I think where we are right now, is skill set consolidation, right? What's happening here is you're having engineers that need to become more business savvy, right? So they need to become more of a business analyst, be able to actually determine that it's not just engineering, but how to actually create value for, or what is my value proposition to the business. And then you have business analysts that are becoming more engineering. Hey, I can build this application with plain English, right? I can build marketing landers with plain English. So you have this consolidation of like, business people and engineers that are just kind of coming together. And then you're going to have a workforce that you no longer have this line of, oh, he's on the business side. Oh, no, he's on the tech side. So what happens in a world where you're giving the tools to every single person, and every single person in the workforce can give you the same quality work, can give you at the same time, at the same cost? You're eradicating the way that we actually do recruiting today. The way that we do recruiting today is we look at your experience, we look at the skill set, and we say, okay, well, skill set is a differentiator. Where AI is going over the next 5, 10 years is, okay, well, let's just erase skill set, the ability for you to judge by skill set, because everyone can do the same thing at the exact same rate. Oh, well, what makes humans separate now? And that's what we go back to, like, well, what are we really good at is creative thinking, abstract thinking. Like, we need to start thinking about what that world looks like when you now basically proliferate the entire skill set so everyone has the exact same capabilities, right? So really interesting kind of conversations if you start pulling on that thread. So a little bit more practical here from a organizational tech and what should we be doing. So here, very simple kind of matrix diagram where you have innovation and growth, you have operational efficiency, sustainability, and then you also have governance and ethics on the right-hand side, which is a huge area that we just don't have enough people kind of focused in. And then you have everything on the left-hand side, which is, hey, what do we do with emerging technologies? How do we actually leverage data? What does workforce productivity really mean, and how do we actually get there? Customer-centric solutions, like we're hyper obsessing over like the experience of customers, because brand loyalty is a thing and experience is a thing. So you may lose customers because one insurance company has better AI agents than the other one. So we switch because we get all the information that we need without having to be on the phone for an hour and a half waiting for a representative, right? So that kind of stuff always comes to the surface. And then I highlighted some of the green things that are really pertinent that we're looking at today, where a lot of attention is kind of is going into. All right, so agents. People always ask, well, what the hell is the difference between generative AI, LLMs, agents? Like, way too much terminology, right? So let's break this down. When you look at an LLM, it's what we call like a single pass answer. Hey, let me ask you this question, and you give me some type of answer, right? Whether it's hallucinated or not is outside of this of the point. But that is really the interrogation scheme, right? Hey, I interface with you, you give me an answer, and I'm on my own. An agent is exactly the exact same thing, that it just happens to have additional tools. So, for example, when you tell ChatGPT, Anthropic, pick your flavor, and you say, hey, I want you to research this particular thing. What that is going to do is that, yes, I have this bank of knowledge here, but it's outdated. So I'm going to use this tool, which is called a browser, right? Just for simplicity's sake. And I'm going to use that browser to then actually start looking at what's been recent in there. Once I have that information, I'm going to also look at it from the lens of all the information that I have, and then I'm going to give you some type of output. So that is probably the easiest, most prevalent tool that agents have, right? When you start looking at beyond that, then you have tools like integrations with HubSpot, integrations with CRMs, integrations with ERPs. And this is nothing more than just an LLM leveraging those connectors, leveraging those particular tools to then give you an answer, right? So an agent is just an LLM with tools, and it needs to coordinate or orchestrate how those tools come to be to produce some type of outcome or answer. So very similar to neural networks, one fluid simple decision. Hey, is this a cat? Yes or no? To, hey, many floors, complex decisions. Yes, this is a picnic table because I did all these things, right? So there's a lot of correlation when we look at these terms to really understand what it is that they're trying to tell us. Surprised there hasn't been one question yet. I wonder who the first one will. I think Tim said we'll give $100 gift card to Amazon for the first person that put something in the chat.
Yeah, I don't remember saying that. I do not remember saying that. But thank you for offering that money up.
All right.
I mean,
so
I heard Tim say it. I heard it.
Oh, see, now it's corroborated. There you go.
I got your back, man. I heard Tim say it.
There you go. See.
That looked like a bus.
All right, so what can agents do, right? So we have here, again, right, when we look at this from a 2D kind of access, we have, okay, well, we have this comment at the very top and we have these advanced cases at the very bottom. And then what happens here is that there's nothing limiting an agent from using one or multiple tools, right? So we're gonna start with very basic at the top, which is common, less tools, all the way to more advanced and more tools. So the first one that I used is the deep research, the web crawler. Hey, I want you to research this particular thing. I go out into the internet, I get all these articles, I process, I synthesize, and then I infer, and I give you some type of answer, right? So that's a very common use case, and it only really needs a browser tool. Personal AI executive or board member. This is a really good one. There's a book called The AI Driven Leader. It's a great book. And what the author does is that he basically gives this notion of don't just ask AI for answers. What you can do is actually have the agent or the LLM actually quiz you or take a different approach to what you have. So very common use cases that we see is I have a presentation that I want to give to the board. I have a presentation I want to give to a client. I have some type of investment vehicle that I want to present. Take a look at this and please critique it and tell me all my blind spots. Like AI is very good at that, right? Because it has all this information, it has all these presentations, it has all these kind of context that is now trying to figure out, okay, well, this is what's wrong with it. This is what I would improve, right? So you want to think about it from that executive kind of board member, right? So by the time that you present it, you've already had that type of optic kind of verify, right? So it's a really interesting case of how to use LLMs. Data entry automation, right? This may require one or more tools where you have, okay, well, I have some type of source. Maybe I have some type of layer in the middle with Python that I need to kind of stage and kind of cut up and slice. And then I have some type of other tool that then places it in a particular thing, right? Or I'm getting from raw sources in some type of database in Salesforce. It has a particular agent that puts it out, looks at the particular email marketing campaign, and then it uses let's just say it's HubSpot to now put it into some other department's kind of CRM, right? So like that kind of notion. Predictive maintenance coordinator. So this is also like, okay, well, there's a lot of different agents that I need to use, a lot of different tools that I need to use for this because how do I know what the state of it is? What are the parameters that I need to be looking out for? Do I need to be proactive in this particular things? Is there any escalation, any alerting, like anything like that? And I'm going to coordinate between all the people that need to be involved based on this particular set of input, right? So that's just another use case. Very similar to a strategic planner, right? Like, hey, I want to come up with a brand new marketing campaign that I'm going to run through 2026, focusing this particular things and split it up by quarter, right? So that requires a ton of different tools to be able to then come up with what that strategy should be over time. So I'm going to give you an example here. So let's just say that you have an AI COE steering committee, right? So what this committee is responsible for is I need to process the intake of ideas. I need to assess them. I need to measure them. I need to validate them. And then I'm going to plan and prep. So by the time that the steering committee looks at this, they're always formatted the exact same way. The value proposition is identified. And I can really just focus on looking at this and seeing, is this a good idea or not? And then how do we fund it or take it to production? So let's just take it. You have an idea intake agent, right? This agent can say, okay, great. So I'm going to take this idea, I'm going to collect all the data. And if there's anything missing from this idea, I'm going to now ask the person that submitted this to make sure that I get all the parameters. And I'm going to take all this information. And then instead of giving it back to the user, I'm actually going to give it to a second agent that is just going to assess this idea. The beauty of this is that what you're doing right off the bat is that you're actually formatting and standardizing the initial source of data so that the rest of the pipeline can actually do what they need to do. So this assessment agent says, hey, actually, I think this is a great idea. It hits kind of, let's just say that you're looking at it from a quarterly or yearly perspective of what the incentives and what the vision and mission statement of the corporation is, and it actually matches, right? Whatever those input parameters are. And it says, this is amazing. Now I'm going to give it to a potential impact agent. This agent now looks at, well, let's just say that these two agents are combined, right? Potential impact and feasibility. Like, can we do this? How hard would it be? And what would be the potential impact on the business, right? Either from an ROI perspective, from a cost savings perspective, are we eliminating some of the risk? Like, are we going to be able to either increase our revenue or create a new revenue stream? So there's a lot of things that can, happen there once you actually have that initial set of assessment agent. Typically, when you look at this and you look at a human board that does this could take weeks, months, and the company gets very frustrated. People that submit ideas get frustrated because there's not a fast turnaround. So they start losing a lot of belief in the company to be able to execute and give them the tools that they need so they don't have to leave their job. So you start seeing how all of this combines to really form where we are as in the market. So once the feasibility and the potential impact agent look at it, they say, yeah, we can do this and we have a high impact, right? There's a huge ROI that we can actually see this. So now we go to a risk assessment agent. Very typical when you go to legal or you go to privacy and you look at it and you say, hey, what's our posture on this? And are we really exposing ourselves a lot here? Typically happens in like life sciences, in financial services, any regulated industry, that you need to have some type of risk assessment here, right? So there's an agent that can actually do that, or at least prepare enough information so then a human can actually go over it, and then it has a lot of the basic information that a human didn't need to collect. So from there, let's just say that there's a project plan and dependency agency. This is more on the technical and integration perspective, where it says, okay, well, we know that because of everything that has been analyzed, we need access to these particular 3 platforms, and I have the policies on what that looks like. I know the teams that need to be involved, and I can actually scope out a high level or an HLD kind of process that needs to be vetted in order for us to actually be able to do this. And what happens at the very end of this is that now you have this entire document with the data and everything that you would need to have for humans to actually have a intelligent discussion without having to be trapped in all these nuanced details and all the particular things that realistically, we don't have to get caught in the politics. We don't have to get caught up in any of this. Like, we can have a lot of this already been automated, so then we can now judge and use our brains to be able to then come up to our own conclusions. See, Mike posted something in the chat. Besides deepfakes and digital twins, what can you tell us about ethical concerns about the widening use of AI, such as United Healthcare using AI tools to make claims decisions, or other instances where human instinct is being traded for diagnostic speed, such as in medical field, or with other decision-making promises? Huge question with a lot of different layers, not only from a moral, ethical perspective, but also from the US's healthcare system is really the largest fraud system, I think, on the planet. And I think AI really is not the biggest issue. I think it's the companies themselves and the systems that we have built that have allowed these health companies to be able to manipulate and do all these particular things. Now, I can tell you some of the stuff that I have seen. There was a company about 10 years ago out of Israel, and the company was called Zebra. And essentially what they did is they took all these radiographies and they trained the model to be able to determine with a 97% accuracy within 5 minutes whether something was cancerous or not. So when you look at tools like that, right, those tools add value and they add a tremendous amount to our health system, right? The problem is here is that healthcare companies are always looking to cut. They're always looking to kind of put the limits because they don't want to spend over money. They just want to get as much money as they want. So I think AI makes a big play there. I think the big issue here is that I would challenge the quality of the engineering that these companies have. So you're actually dictating from an engineering perspective that you don't have the best talent, deciding some of the most important thing on the planet, which is like, hey, my health, what does my health chart look like and what should be those particular things? So I would not personally, I think that is a very icky area that we don't have enough legislation, but I do believe that it's just going to take a couple of Supreme Court cases that go all the way and legislation needs to be formed. But yeah, it's a very gray area, especially on where the decision happens. And there's always a due diligence, right? The more human or the closer it is to human kind of health, the more rigorous I would be in actually not using AI for things, or have a process where AI is just an input, right? Let's just say, like, for example, in a claim where it's like life or death and there's some type of time interval, then yes, I don't want that claim to sit in somebody's desk for 4 or 5 months. I want that claim to give me all the information immediately so that could go through a particular board or of approval or something like that, right? So there's a lot of nuances in between that process that I think could work or could not work, but I just think a lot of insurance companies could, yeah, it really depends on the culture, the people who run it, and who are you at the mercy of? But that's a fantastic question.
Is it even fair to say that AI is making that decision, and aren't humans making the decision by programming it and building the models the way they build it?
Yeah, and that's where I would say the biggest issue is there is, yeah, you have humans training it, right? But the training is not going to be based on actual valid health claims, right? That's going to be a small percentage, because where are the claims going to be? Here's our policy, and here's our hard deadlines of where we can't spend. This is where we cannot, do. So there's like a huge business layer in there that is now getting in front of a decision that could benefit or could be, life or death for a particular patient, right? So you're 100% right. Like, it's really the human and what data they're being asked to do, or what data they're being asked to then train these models with, right? So I think there's a lot of room there that needs to be looked at from a microscope perspective. And I would, if I would say from a legislative perspective, yeah, I think every claim needs to have a very clear process of where AI was touched, what was that output look like, who was the individual that actually did this. And I think those companies, at some point, somebody needs to be liable for those particular decisions, right? The same way that now CISOs, there's a lot of companies now where like CISOs are being held personally responsible for breaches if they're negligent to particular things, right? One thing is to have a breach and you say, hey, we did everything within our power and we had a breach. Another one is like, hey, listen, we have conversations for over years where we said we need X, Y, and Z, we need this particular posture, and it doesn't happen. And then boom, there you go. Like, what happens there, right? Like, somebody needs to be accountable. And if these companies get fined $15 million for a multi-billion-dollar company, why the hell do they care, right? So there is an ethical implication there as well. Yeah, I know that we're getting to the top of ours, so I think there's only a few more slides. The way that we always look at AI implementation is always starting with the people. It always has to start with the people, always followed by the process, right? Because people follow processes, they actually are part of processes, and then the tech and the tooling should be the last thing to look at. Where you get into a lot of trouble is like, we're looking at this tool to then, I don't know, just replace people or like look at this particular entire process. But if you don't understand your people and the process and why those things are there, AI basically is just going to fail, the same as any other kind of software application. Always think about this is something we came up with that is basically maintenance, updates, security, and training. So anytime you look at like software implementations, anything that you're rolling out, especially even from an AI perspective, there's a subset of this for like models, and being able to actually look at what the model's actually spitting out from an ethical bias perspective, all of these things. But always look at that, right? Like, hey, it's not only implementing, it's how do we maintain it, how do we update it, how do we secure it, and then how do we train or retrain whatever it is that we developed. General reference architecture. So this is something that we always kind of just for people to really wrap their minds around in terms of like, okay, well, you have these roles and controls, right, at your edges, right, that basically go vertically in an enterprise. And then you have these stacks of where things live, right? You always start with your kind of what your infrastructure, then you look at what your data and your life cycle is. That really enables a lot of the business logic, whether it's microservices or some of the routing stuff that needs to happen. You have AI services, and then you have all the AI interfaces at the very top, right? That could be web applications, mobile applications, desktops, it could be recordings, it doesn't really matter, right? So at least this gives you a little bit of the model of like, how are these things stacked and where does like security and governance or controls come into the fold? And that is it.